Hi, my name is Frank Silver. I'm a dead man walking. And I guess I gotta start at the beginning to explain why I am still walking, talking, and being a big pain in the collective asses of things that would make your eyes roll back and your spine slide out your ass from fear and disbelief. There was one case that started it all. Now, I ain't big on missing persons cases. You never find what you want to find, and on the off chance you do find the missing person, there's a good reason they don't want to be found, or you're left bringing home a handful of bad news and a corpse. Or a traumatized child who's going to grapple with PTSD the rest of their life, which is a no bueno. Not that kids don't need saving, but the second you run a missing persons case, unless you can separate your feelings and emotions out, everything gets tinted. You tend to get biased. But a paycheck was a paycheck, and a damn 17-year-old girl was missing. The man who called me in, he said a cop told him I was the guy to go to for missing people. He's a friend of mine, that cop. A guy on the force I'd done some consulting for before, a detective. He called me a finder. I made it abundantly clear to the person who hired me that I might not find her, and he made it abundantly clear that if I did, he'd pay me triple my standard rate, which, that's a lot of money. I wasn't sure if the guy cared, or if he was just worried about his public image. You see, it was the father. A 17-year-old girl's parents were pretty wealthy. Rich folk can be like that, shiny white and sparkling clean on the outside so the public can stand in awe of their radiance. But, packed full of alcoholism and dark secrets underneath, all about what people see, not what they actually are. Still, I got a knack for reading people, and this guy seemed pretty genuine. Genuine is good. Genuine means emotional ties. It means the family is less likely to lie to me. The issue is, genuine as it was, the folks weren't that close to the kid. That kind of dampens those emotional ties. Basically, it was the typical people with money business, in terms of their kid, but with the added twist of the fact that they actually cared for the kid. Mom was racked with guilt for not spending more time with her daughter. The empty bottles of wine in the trash outside that I checked out while I was coming in, and the tall glass full that she was nursing when I walked in, pointed to all of that, plus a lack of coping mechanisms beyond hiding at the bottom of a bottle. Not that I am always the person to judge when it comes to alcoholism. Dad's guilt was manifested differently. He was hyper-organized, hyper-aware, twitching, looking everywhere. He had the eyes of a man who worked hard all his life, and now that his kid was MIA, he was realizing he should have stopped while he was ahead, appointed a new CEO, or sold his extremely valuable company, and raised his daughter. Instead, he was signed up for heart attack number 3, working too much, spending more time than he was working, actively being terrified of the concept of parental responsibility. Chances were that he grew up in money, and his father and mother were emotionally distant and made a point of having servants raise the kid while they did their thing. It occurred to me he might not actually know what a functional familial relationship even looked like. Either way, there was enough genuine guilt to tell me they weren't just doing this for their image, which made what they said a lot more credible. Unfortunately, they knew their teenage daughter less than the average, barely, of the American family. That left me alone in her bedroom, her mother sobbing in the next room, her father chain-smoking in his office, drinking scotch that cost more than my kidneys would sell for, and staring into the middle distance. It was a kidnapping without evidence. There was no sign of a struggle, no witnesses, no one believed she was missing. Everyone was calling it a waste of resources, even with the family's money. Detectives were on the case, giving it the cursory sort of look while waiting on the clock, working on other shit. They believed the girl would return on her own. At the time, you gotta understand, there was a major mafia issue in the city, a cop killer on the loose, and All in all, it was a perfect storm of incompetence, callousness, crime, and a strong desire for vengeance, and in the middle of all of that, a teenage girl was missing. Missing, alone, possibly in danger. Nobody else seemed to want to save her. And I had a feeling she was actually in trouble. All the family had to go on was a message on the answering machine from their daughter where she screamed, "God, Mom, Dad, they're coming. They're coming for me." And then that was cut off by sounds of a struggle, hushed voices, the squealing of tires, and the sharp static sound of somebody chucking a fucking phone out of a goddamn car window. Or a van. It was probably a van. GPS on her phone had been off already. The girl didn't want her parents tracking her. She was smart enough. Her room, that was the awkward part. It was too clean. I stood there in the center of it, looking around. It wasn't stereotypical, that's for sure. Her desk was compulsively organized, to the point I was sure she got in trouble when it wasn't. I'd have sat down in her chair, but I was standing somewhere around 6'11", and she was not a big girl. I was worried if I sat down on the chair, I'd have broken the expensive metal and mesh construction and wound up having to have the remains of it extricated from my rectum. She had a laptop the father gave me the password for. That made me raise an eyebrow, but too many more questions on their parenting skills, directly to them that is, and they'd have balked. I was going to need more information from them later when they calmed down a little. I left the laptop alone for the time being and did a walk around, and the girl's room was bigger than half of my goddamn apartment, at least, and that's if I was being nice to my apartment. She had the standard stuff, bed tucked in one corner, no posters on the walls, but several LCD displays hung around, shifting from picture to picture, those paper-thin ones they got now. Yeah. The pictures seemed to be mostly bands that her parents wouldn't approve of, gymnastics pictures that had her in them, in a gymnastics outfit, with some kind of skirt-like thing. That made me curious, so I took a closer look. Girl had a uniform that went to her wrists and ankles, turned a unitard into something almost needlessly conservative, like a feminized version of a male gymnastics outfit. Couldn't exactly understand why. Not that I was appreciating the figure of a teenage girl, but she was not in any way unattractive. There was no reason for her to feel like she had to cover herself. At least quite that much. But this is getting creepy, so let's move on. I shrugged and turned away from the frame. It was one more question to ask, why she had an outfit like that. Little details can be important, give you a look into the state of mind of the person you're searching for. As I turned, the picture flashed up to a new one. This one had her in a martial arts uniform. That cleared up how she managed to get away with time to make a call, but not how they got a hold of her after that. I filed that away too. Interesting developments, possibly unimportant, more questions to ask. I checked her bookshelves. Trotsky, Dickens, all kinds of classic literature and shit like that. That stuff dominated 2 shelves. Another shelf was all Japanese comic books I wasn't sure I could understand the appeal of. In Japanese, no less. Regular American comic books were stacked at the end of her bed in a bin, all in plastic sheets. I checked them out, and girl had good taste. Made note of that. She also had a thing for stories with strong female leads. Not surprising, really. The rest of her books were all fiction. None of them were hollow, no book vaults or whatever. I checked, no secrets there. The rest of her room was dominated by training equipment. Pommel horse, chin-up bar, heavy bag, speed bag. Girl was not fucking around when it came to fitness. She had a treadmill with more settings on it than a goddamn space shuttle. Nothing in the room was out of place. Suggested to me strict parents. When they were home, I figured I could assume that a lot of the time they spent telling her how to live and what to do. I couldn't be sure, but a lot of my suspicions were growing pretty well into educated guesses. Considering that her dad had the password to her computer, Well, it was about one step short of a solid confirmation. There were no secrets, though. I checked every nook, cranny, air vent, pocket of every garment in the dresser, pocket of every piece of clothing in the closet bigger than my goddamn bathroom. Every inch of wall got a pat for false panels, every box stored on the shelves in the closet got checked. I didn't find a goddamn thing. Her laptop and I got acquainted on the floor of the bedroom. The password worked, as I expected. Her father seemed like the kind of guy to know a little bit about computers, but it seemed like it was only up to and including some wicked-ass spreadsheets. Mother was a doctor, surgeon, sharp as a tack, but vaguely technophobic from what I observed. Her office had exactly one monitor in it, connected to a computer that looked like it hadn't been turned on since 2005. Considering it was 2022, that was a bit of an indicator. I started searching underneath the standard stuff, because this girl was smart, that much was clear. She wouldn't keep something out in the open or in a common hiding spot. All the files in the standard places were squeaky clean. All the files in the non-standard places were squeaky clean. So I started diving deep, checking out system files, seeing if there was anything that didn't belong in those sensitive folders, etc., etc. A girl like that, she could have kept some kind of journal or diary online. That would be my next stop. I see a smarter girl with controlling parents who actually had a security team in the house, operating out of a security room. You know, she'd probably keep her private life private. Also, the security team had been fired. Earlier that day, a new one would be showing up in the morning. I don't know why. She was taken while outside of the house. I presume it made the father feel better. He was exercising some level of control over his life now that it was out of control. Girl was good, I'll give her that. But finding people involved computers fairly often. I'd spent years finding people all around the damn world who are a lot more experienced and better trained than that teenager. I'm no hacker, I never was, but I know my way around a file system, and, she was no Mossad agent. I found her journal archived inside of a JPEG picture file using a program that she had on her own hard drive. I didn't even have to get out my toolkit. It was in the system folder, the one you're not supposed to delete. Disguised as a config file, the program to access the JPEG archive. She performed well, but a goddamn 1.6 gigabyte JPEG is suspicious all on its own. A half a gigabyte file mixed in with primary system files that was named Picture Archive made things a little obvious. But I guess she didn't think her parents would know that wasn't a standard system file. She wasn't wrong. I doubted they would have known either. 2 hours was a long time to be searching. Considering it was a missing persons case and time was short, first 48 and all that. But with no other real leads, I had to do what I had to do, which involved violating the privacy of a teenage girl. At least I can read quickly. Imagine my surprise when I found out the journal had been kept for years. My surprise only grew as I found out she was born male. The parents didn't mention that she was transgender. Apparently they didn't think it was relevant, which was stupid of them. But smart people with lots of money tend to do stupid things, like stupid things are going out of style. She was sure damn pretty, though. Transitioned at 15, got special approval for hormones at 16. Smart starting her young, after a therapist confirmed she wasn't just a flighty teenager latching onto what she possibly saw as a fad. It was irrelevant, possibly. Well, or at least only barely relevant in terms of her psyche. But I wouldn't know until I investigated more. The most recent journal entries were the most enlightening. "What have you gotten yourself into, Miss Lee?" That was me asking nobody that. I was hoping her journal would tell me. It seemed like she was rebelling against her parents' control, though, based on the journal. It was actually a little bit funny, in a dark sort of way, to find that her parents were perfectly supportive of her transition, but were controlling enough to encourage her to rebel. It was almost comedic. I started finding references to a boy, go figure, teenage girl, pretty, sweet on a guy her parents wouldn't approve of. An older guy, no less. Early 20s, dark hair, blue eyes, stubble, money. Teenage heartthrob, minus the teen. Go figure again. Couldn't conceal a picture in the picture archive, or she chose not to, but my girl was descriptive. She was also descriptive of his ties to the reason why her parents wouldn't approve. At first, it seemed like the boy was impressing her with magic tricks. That's what she described. She talked about him burning things with his mind, telekinesis, things she could barely believe, but was starting to believe anyway, because apparently he was incredibly convincing. Then came some clandestine meetings with other people in a group she said he was very secretive about. These were people who could do things like he could, people who were older than him, but trusted and listened to him, took his instructions, as if he was their leader. It was sounding more and more like a cult with every passing page, and with every passing page she was getting more and more paranoid of them. But like every goddamn teenager, she thought she was invincible. She seemed to have it in her head that she'd get in with this group, who she began calling a cult, and get evidence on whatever they were doing to fake their tricks. Apparently, she had heard something that she wasn't supposed to hear, too, about them convincing street kids to come into their fold. She wanted to find out why, and then go to the police, bust them up, be a hero. Prove to her folks she could survive and operate perfectly well on her own. I was almost proud of her. It wasn't particularly a stupid plan. In Blackwood, getting the cops to go after something as small as a relatively harmless cult. Harmless, I say, because they were going after street kids. I don't think street kids being hurt is harmless, but that was public perception. Getting them to go after a cult like that, especially if they're not dealing with drugs or guns, it just wouldn't have been effective. She'd have to have evidence, a reason. Like I said, I was almost proud of her. If it wasn't for the fact that apparently either they found her out or had simply kidnapped her for final phase brainwashing or something like that. I wasn't sure what the purpose of the cult even was, and neither was she. "Damn it, Melissa, you made a big goddamn mistake," I muttered. "But I'll find you, kid. You gave me a great description. I'll find you." I started to rise, when something exploded in the living room and a high-pitched scream split the silence of the house from the room next to the one I was in. The security team had been fired. Parents hadn't been called about a ransom. Police couldn't seem to do anything, even though they had detectives on the case, quote-unquote, because her folks had money, because the detectives weren't actually working the damn case. The daughter had gotten involved in a cult that she admitted herself she didn't know what their resources were, what their connections were, what their level of skill was. I'd thank God that I was carrying a gun, but none of the gods I know are on speaking terms with me.